zone moving. So this is a concept I came up with a disgustingly long time ago to help our hypermobile clients understand how their laxity can affect their movement patterns, but not just how the laxity affects movement patterns, but how those changes to how they move can cause a lot more issues immediately and indeed further down the line. So zone moving is about separating your body into parts, okay? And it's about distal parts, about proximal parts. So if we look at my arm, zone 1 would be my proximal part, the part closest to me. That would be my shoulder, okay? My shoulder blade and my shoulder. Zone 2 would be my elbow, and zone 3 would be my wrist, okay? My last movable joint. My leg, however, would be slightly different. Zone 1 would be my hip, zone 2 would be my knee, and zone 3 would be my feet. So, zone movement is important, okay? Because if you watch how I move from zone 1, firstly, the very first thing that happens is my shoulder blade has a little bit of a contraction. I'm not talking a contraction, I'm just talking a little bit of activation. This allows me to create stability at the base of my joint. Next, my zone 2, being supported and stabilized from zone 1, allows me to start reaching my arm out, and zone 2, now supporting and stabilizing zone 3, can push zone 3 forward. And you'll notice when I move, my arm is the same length. Let's have a look at that again. I'm standing up nice and tall. My arm, same length. Every single time. Now, that's important, okay? So if we think about this, my shoulder joint, here's my humeral head, and let's say this is my hand, okay? I am effectively using things like my serratus anterior to help push the joint forward, but the stability, the stability of the whole movement, the foundation of it comes from here. So it means effectively it's pushing my arm like this, it's pushing my joints forward. Now, with hypermobility, a lot of people move from zone 3, the distal parts of the body. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people with hypermobility are very clumsy. They walk into things, they hit things, they knock things over. It's because you move from zone 3. Now, one of the issues that comes with zone 3 movement is that we're not pushing joints, we're pulling joints. And what I mean by that is, again, I'll move from zone 1. That's as far as my arm can go. Every time I reach, my arm stays the same length, which is good for my brain, because brains are all about predicting. So if my arm is always the same length, it doesn't have to have prediction errors. It's predicting exactly how long my arm is going to be. Now, if this is zone 1 moving, okay, for me, watch what happens if I move from the distal parts. You see how much further I got? So zone 1, zone 3. Now, one of the reasons that this happens is because as we move from the wrist, as we move from the distal part, we're pulling the entirety of the arm behind the joint. And again, if this is zone 1 moving, okay, helping to push the joint forward, zone 3 moving, pulling from here, does this. It moves it in the joint. Now, keep in mind, if this isn't stable, if we haven't got that slight activation at zone 1 to push the arm forward, we're just going to pull off here. And we're pulling at unstable zone 2, and we're pulling at unstable zone 1 behind the joint that we're moving, in this case the wrist. Now again, this is going to be fixed. So as we pull it, your body is essentially going to follow the path of least resistance. And if you've got tissue laxity that allows you to pull on it a little bit more than you should do, then it means that when you move from this area, it's going to start to pull out of the joint. Now, think about all of the times you've ever subluxed or dislocated. It's when you're not paying attention, and it's generally, let's say, the shoulder, it's when you're reaching. So if here was my television and it's nighttime, I'm going to bed, and I reach behind my television to turn the plug off, okay? If I move from zone 1, I am pushing my joints forward. Likewise as well, because my arm is always the same length, my brain knows how close I need to be to reach the switch. However, being hypermobile and moving from zone 3 means that every time I move, my arm is in different length. So my brain isn't going to be able to accurately figure out how close I need to be to that switch, which means I'm just going to walk up to the switch, and then I'm just going to move from zone 3, and I'm just going to keep pulling until eventually my shoulder goes, oh, what was that? And then I'm slinging it and I'm keeping it, I'm slinging it, I'm keeping it immobilized for the next 24 hours. So you can see how something that's very, very simple, like reaching and grabbing, when we've got hypermobility, can become a bit of an issue because we're moving from the wrong parts. If I was to, let's use this hand sanitizer as an example, okay? When I walk up to it, I know I need to stop here to be in an arm's length of it. Again, I walk up to it, and I'm always within an arm's length of it. More importantly though, I move from zone 1, so my arm is the same length. If I was to move from zone 3, I'm going to hyperextend that joint. Okay, I'm going to start to pull on it. So a lot of people with hypermobility, when they do go to reach things, the brain isn't that great at figuring out the distance between you and the object you're trying to grab, but more importantly, it doesn't really know the arm length you've got, which means that when you come up, you're either going to come and stop too far away, and if I move from zone 1, I physically can't reach that, but if I move from zone 3, I can hyperextend to grab it. Only issue with this is when I move from zone 1, stable, stable, stable. When I pick this up, I'm going to have a transfer force into a stable base. Fantastic. If I move from zone 3, I'm going to hyperextend, I'm going to make the joint very unstable, and then as I pick this up, I've got a transfer force going down into an unstable joint, and there's a very good chance that, oh, I've subluxed my shoulder, if I'm lucky, and it goes straight back in, or I've done a full-blown dislocation. Likewise, for a lot of the time with people with hypermobility, to compensate for this, so if you have subluxed your shoulders for numerous times throughout your life, you're probably going to be quite wary about grabbing things or overreaching. So what you'll start to do is you'll probably start to come too close to it, and you'll end up knocking it. Especially, you see this all the time when people with hypermobility try and take a glass of water off the desk and they accidentally knock it over and go, oh Christ, this again. So how you move your body when you have hypermobility is very important, because you want to be moving from zone 1s. This stops us putting those joints into those awkward positions. Remember, hypermobility, yes, the tissues being lax is an issue, but that's by far and most not the most important issue. The most important issue is the mapping. Now, I can't tell you whether it's the inaccuracies in the cortical map, that kind of smudging almost, although I'm not a massive fan of that word, that affects how you move, okay? So it comes from the tissue laxity, and that's the reason that you move that way. Or if this is just a very maladaptive pattern of moving because. So it's kind of like a little bit of a chicken versus the egg situation. I don't really know which one comes before the other one, okay? But what we do know is that it's important we move from the right parts of the body. Now, some of the issues you're going to have when you start to progress through this course and you start to learn about moving from zone 1 is that it's going to be really cognitively taxing. Incredibly cognitively taxing, because your movement needs to pass through 3 phases. A cognitive phase in which you're really consciously focusing on moving from zone 1, okay? Then an associative phase, which is essentially where you're still consciously focusing on it, but you still have lapses in concentration and you just automatically do it sometimes. You think, oh, okay, I wasn't really that focused on it. And then we have the autonomous phase, essentially. You don't have to think about how you move. Every time you reach something, you're reaching for it with zone 1. Now, there are differences in how we move specific body parts from zone 1, because it essentially comes down to what type of movements are we doing. If we're doing a gross movement like lifting our arm up, then, zone 1 stabilize, out to 2, out to 3. That's a good zone movement, okay? But it's a gross motor movement. It doesn't require much thought at all. Different body parts aren't doing different things. It's just you moving one limb. Something like writing, however, a very complex, very fine motor skill, essentially, most of the movement is going to occur here at zone 3, but we still need to move from zone 1. So if I pretend I'm writing, I tell you what, let's grab a little pen. Let's pretend I'm writing. I want you to watch my shoulder, okay? So I'm going to stabilize shoulder, stabilize elbow, stabilize wrist, and now I'm writing. So you can see I can move my hand as much as I want. If I need to go across the pavement, I'm stable here, but I'm just going to give up a little bit of the stability to move my arm this way so that I can write across the page. It's nice and stable. Nothing is going on at this joint. However, if I move from zone 3 and I start to write, okay? Look at all that movement in my shoulder. Zone 3 is carrying the entire weight of my arm behind it. All my attention is here, okay? That means there's a lot of movement coming here. This is why zone movement is incredibly important when you're hypermobile, because it keeps your joints nice and stable, okay? Yes, a lot of people preach about alignment. You've got to have your joints stacked. They've got to be aligned. That does not matter if you cannot move from the correct zone. Does not matter, because even in my most stacked form, my ultimate form, okay, in the best posture, although there is no best posture, and I move from zone 1, perfect. However, if I'm in this perfect posture, this stacked perfect alignment, and I move from zone 3, I'm still compromising the stability of my shoulder because I'm pulling the joint instead of pushing the joint. So as we move through this course, let's have a look at the different types of movements and how we should actually be moving.